Welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I have Mike Brown that's going to tell us a little bit about his story. He is all things wealth building. He was an aviation pilot for the Navy, but he's built and scaled so many different businesses. He's invested and for people hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to learn a lot of the tactics around it, how to build wealth and designing a life that's really going to help you scale. Before we dive in, down in the show notes below, there's a whole training I want to give you about how to scale and build an online brand. So many times people struggle with knowing how to start, where to begin, how to scale with ads, how to build the sales team, have the AI to help them with that. Down below, there's a free training on how to do that. Go check that out. Mike, as we dive in here, a question that I want to ask and get your thoughts on is, what is high performance? What does that look like? What's the definition? How do you apply that to your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I just want to say thanks for having me. I'm super
Absolutely.
excited to be here, and this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart because my definition of high performance has dramatically shifted over time. As you mentioned, I was a former naval aviator. I flew jets for the Navy, and so I really learned what it took to perform at an elite level. Tested myself in combat, landing on aircraft carriers. Being a fighter pilot is a really intense job. And so, I learned to build those habits early on. But, as I grew more and more successful, built and sold companies, my definition of success really changed. And so along with it, my definition of high performance changed. So, whereas 10 years ago, it may have been, the habits and systems that allow you to perform at an elite level, which I think there is an element of that. But what high performance looks like to me now is waking up and serving the people that I can help at the highest level. And, really, it's not about me at this point. And I think that's one of the most critical shifts I've made is that, now every single day I'm living into my purpose and allowing people to create their dream life. And so I need to do the things that prepare me and enable me to serve at the highest level possible. So while the habits may still look the same, the intention is completely different.
Amazing. I want to dive into more of those tactics. I think that's going to be really helpful for people. Of like, building wealth is an elusive idea, but it's not really, tactical of like, how do I apply it? So I think that's going to be, something we touch on for everybody that, follows along here. But let me ask this question. Being a pilot is not easy to do. Was this like, tell us at the very beginning, was this a grandfather that, gave you like a little miniature, plane? Was it someone that pinned on like some wings? Did you watch Top Gun? How in the world did you get into aviation for the Navy?
Yeah, so I had a very circuitous route, which is, when I was in the third grade, I had a neighbor that went to the Naval Academy. And I read Patriot Games by Tom Clancy, and Jack Ryan went to the Naval Academy. So I decided in third grade I was going to go to the Naval Academy, and I did do that. I wasn't going there focused on aviation, but that kind of ended up being the best route for me while I was there when we were looking at service selection. And so I was actually a backseater. I was an NFO naval flight officer. If you're familiar with Top Gun, I was Goose, essentially. And when I was at the Naval Academy, I was in the top 95% of my class, meaning, I had an issue with authority. And so I got a lot of demerits, marched a lot of tours, and, ended up being, and you select your service based on your class rank. And mine was toward the bottom. So one of the only slots left was naval flight officer, which is what I ended up picking. And I said, all right, I'm never going to let the Navy choose for me again. Like, I want to be in charge of my own destiny. So I went to flight school and I got number one in my flight school class. And you're supposed to get to pick what you want. Well, I wanted to fly P3s, which is a big spy plane. But the cool thing about P3s, they're land-based. So I thought that would, I saw those guys having barbecues every night. I thought that would be the deal. So I went into my commanding officer's office and said, I got number one, I select P3s. And he said, nope, the number one guy selects jets. And it turned out to be the best decision that anybody ever made for me. I really found a home in the fighter squadron and got to hone that elite performance at a level that I never had before. And so I loved my time in the Navy and really thrived in the fighter squadron. So it was an amazing career.
Did you know you're wired a little bit different? Was this like when you took tests and you're the top of your class? Were you this way before though, and you just had this drive of obsession of being the best?
Yeah, great question. It did. So and some of this, I am today years old, drawing some of these conclusions, but essentially, early on when I was in first grade, my parents got called into the principal's office and they said, "Hey, your son just did his first achievement test. He tested off the charts, but we're not going to tell him because we don't want to disrupt his learning." So I actually didn't find that out till I was 30 years old, and it turns out that my specific type of intelligence, I think we do people a real disservice by describing people as like smart or stupid, right? Because
Sure.
there's so many different types of intelligence, and now we're learning a whole lot more about this with neurodivergence and Asperger's and some of these other things coming out that used to
Mhm.
be kind of labeled as disorders, and now I think we're discovering collectively as a society that they're really superpowers. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
my type of specific intelligence is sort of kind of falls under the neurodivergent type thinking, but it's called orthogonal thinking, which means allows me to essentially, I think in bets, I think in probabilities and distributions of outcomes. And so when I was taking a test, I would be able to infer what the answer was by the way the question was asked. So I did really well on multiple choice tests, for example, which is different, I think, than traditional book smarts. So I wasn't like memorizing facts and then recalling facts on a test. I was thinking in probabilities and being able to intuit the answer without actually studying.
Mhm.
So again, kind of a different type of intelligence, but one that is a massive gift and allowed me to perform at a very high level, whereas a lot of people had to study a lot harder than I did.
And being a pilot too, not just a different pilot, but like flying a jet and trying to land on a moving boat requires that type of, you know, like education or just like to be able to process so many things at once. And then building a business around wealth too, which has a lot of these different variables that you have to hedge for.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's that gift that allowed me to be a great investor when I was building my first company. I've always thought of myself as an investor versus an entrepreneur. And, the difference to me is that an entrepreneur gets an idea and then they are driven with this burn the boats, like win at all costs type mentality. And that's what allows them to be successful. An investor, on the other hand, kind of takes a 30,000 foot view of things. And I just need to win more times than I lose, right? So I
Mm.
make multiple bets, look at where I can generate asymmetric returns, and then try to cut the losers and scale the winners as fast as I can. So it's a slightly different mentality, but it allows me to be really flexible and adaptable. And when something's not working, I can cut it and reinvest elsewhere rather than that burn the boats type mentality.
What was the transition like? Were you building a business before going in the military, or was this after you went in the military that then you started building your first business?
Yeah, no, I always knew two things. I knew I wanted to be in the military, and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I got out of the military in 2012 and moved back to my hometown. Started working for a family friend in the oil and gas business, and then after a couple of years, went out on my own with my business partner, who I actually flew jets with in the Navy. And we figured that if we could run combat missions together, we'd probably make a good team starting a
Mhm.
business. So we left that firm and started our own business in the spring of 2013. And when I was getting out of the Navy, my mentor said that it was the best time in the history of the oil business to be in the oil business, and he was right. A rising tide lifts all boats, and we came into the business at the beginning of one of the greatest oil booms in the history of the world, and we were able to take advantage of that, harness that horsepower, and make some really good decisions along the way.
Has there been some challenges that you've had to face, or have you being so methodical around everything? Have you been able to hedge some of those major challenges that most people deal with the headache of starting entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I was really fortunate in my first business that we kind of caught a tiger by the tail. I mean, it was really there was a lot of momentum in the industry at that time. Things were changing really quickly, and we were in the midst of a gold rush. And so something I say often is that revenue covers up a lot of mistakes. So we made a lot of mistakes along the way, but we were fortunate enough that the rising tide really enabled us to move and scale quickly. And so, that first business, the biggest challenges were really the fact that we could have just scaled a lot bigger had we had more experience, other people's playbooks, that kind of thing. We were just kind of building the airplane while we were flying, essentially. But then, I really feel like that my journey starts after I sold my company.
Okay. Yeah, bring us down that journey there. I mean, what did that look like?
Yeah. So, something I say often is that, like, I had done all the things that society told me to, right? I went and tested myself in combat, built and sold an 8-figure company. And, I had checked all the boxes that people say will make you happy. And I woke up and I wasn't any different. So, okay, now what? And the other thing that happens is, when we start off building a company, right? When you're in that startup mode, you're wearing all the hats, like you're doing everything yourself. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, like waiting for invoices to get paid, to pay your vendors. Like all of that mentality allows you to be successful as a startup entrepreneur. But as you get to scale up, like now you need to build different skill sets, right? You need to learn delegation, how to build world-class teams, how to hire people that are smarter than you and make sure that they're moving the ball appropriately. And those are wildly different skill sets. And the same thing applies to wealth building. And the reality is that you need to shift from being an accumulator of wealth to a defender of wealth. And I really failed to make that shift. So early on, when I started my company, I was betting on myself, leveraging every dollar, pushing all my chips in the middle over and over and over. But then as I sold, my job should have been protecting my wealth, but instead I was still swinging for the fences. I thought I needed $100 million to be happy. So I was making big bets. I was investing in startups. I was investing in venture capital, stock options, commodity futures, like any deal I could get my hands on. I was just deploying capital as rapidly as it would come in my bank account. And 2 years after I sold my company, I ended up buying a distressed e-commerce company, hoping I could turn it around in 12 months and sell it for 5 times what I paid. And it was an absolute disaster. I started losing money the day I closed, and it only got worse from there. And that I say that I really wish, with love, I wish everyone gets to an experience of failure in their life that brings them to their knees, but doesn't make them start completely over, because that's exactly what happened to me. I had a liquidity crisis. All of my capital was deployed into illiquid assets, and I was losing $100,000 a month. I was watching my bank account dwindle towards zero, and just kind of woke up and had this, what does it all mean moment? Like, how did I get here? Like, I had this life-changing windfall after selling my company, and now I'm more stressed out than I've ever been. And there are days I don't even want to get out of bed to face the day. And so that
were you
really
married at that time too?
I was. So
How was that?
I got married early on in the Navy, and then I actually exited that marriage and my company at the same time. And then I got remarried a couple of years ago to my current wife. And we were in a very new relationship as I was going through the thick of it. And, being married to a powerful woman, I think, is an absolute superpower. And here's what I mean by that. There was days that I didn't even want to get out of bed. Like, I was so depressed, full of anxiety, stressed out. And I knew this company wasn't working, and I was pulling all the levers, and I didn't know what to do. And a good wife, I think, would have come in and said, like, hey, buddy, you can get out of bed. Like, you can do it. I believe in you. A great wife said, hey, you can stay in bed. I got you. I'll handle it. And that was really the first time in my life that I had ever felt held and supported in the way where I can actually be a mess and she can actually handle the business and take meetings and work on the company. And to have that in my back pocket was just absolutely a gift.
Now, leading up to this point where you're at with your success, how did you get into making it all right and then switching gears and then learning how to not only build wealth, but defend it?
Yeah. So we had a saying in the Navy, which is criticism keeps us alive. So we would go plan for an hour and a half, fly a mission for an hour and a half, and then we would come back and we would debrief like 3 to 4 hours, and we would pick apart every single thing that we did wrong, right? We didn't talk about the stuff we did right because that's the standard. Perfection is the standard, but we would dissect every little place where we could have made an improvement. So I kind of fell back to that power of debrief and go, okay, number one, how did I get here? Number two, how can I make this right? And as far as how I got there, we kind of already touched on that. I was deploying capital because ultimately I thought I was doing what rich people did.
Right.
Like I saw people, and we have this hero culture around venture capital. If you sell a company, you're supposed to be an angel investor. So I was doing the things I thought that rich people did. And I realized that paradigm was actually not working for me. And as I started to try and right the ship, I started interviewing mentors, family offices, some of the wealthiest people on the planet. And I found out that rich people take a whole lot less risk than we think they do. We see these hero investments, but we don't realize that they have, an entire portfolio of safe investments that they built first. And I was building in the wrong order. I was going all in on high risk, high reward bets, but I should have built the safety bucket first. So that was the mechanical problem, which was that I was doing things out of order. And then the second problem was a lot deeper and a lot more insidious. So I started going to coaching, hiring coaches, going to therapy, reading books, learning, giving myself an MBA in personal finance. And what I realized is that I had a really broken relationship to money and specifically to risk. And what happens is that when we take a risk and it pays off, our brain releases serotonin, dopamine, and we get this feeling of safety and satisfaction. But what happens is over time, every time we take a bet and we win, we need to bet more and win more in order to reach that same level of satisfaction. It's called hedonic adaptation. And so I was literally writing checks my butt can't cash, trying to keep up with the hedonic adaptation. And it's really the neuroscience of risk addiction. And so I was deeply addicted to risk. I had a very easy come, easy go mentality when it comes to money. And, in the personal finance world, we hear a lot about abundance and scarcity, right? That abundance is good and scarcity is bad. But I would posit that those things are actually neutral, right? And we probably need to be somewhere on the middle, because I could have used a little scarcity, right? I was so abundant that I was spending money almost indiscriminately or investing money indiscriminately. And a little bit of scarcity could have just meant that I was a good steward of my wealth. So, now I try to help people identify those things, is that neither of these are inherently good or bad. We actually want to find an integrated, balanced type approach.
Well, let's talk about that, because a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, they're business owners, and they have an obsession about their business. But there's a fine line between success and the outward success, right? So many business owners, they don't pay themselves that well, is what I found. And then even though that they're wealthy on the outside, they don't apply it. And it's that what you're talking about. It's just like they're charging, and it's always charging, and they're never hedging for taking stock of what's happening in their life or learning from it. And so how do you go about building the true wealth and building those fortitudes of things that you're talking about in the first place, than actually just going and charging out the gate with everything? What does that look like?
Yeah. So you've essentially identified the problem, which is that, most of us, like, we're taught that more is better from a societal perspective on down, right? Is this like, we need to scale at all costs, put your head down, swing for the fences and win at all costs. And that mindset is really valuable at the beginning. Mm-hmm. But at some point, right, more is not necessarily better, because ultimately what I've learned is that wealth and financial wealth, money is just a battery, right? And we need to use our money in order to create the life that we actually want to create. And so I went about designing that playbook for myself. I got really clear on what I value, how I want to spend my time, which is our only non-renewable resource, right? So we can always get more money, but we can never get more time.
Right.
So if that's my most scarce resource, then how am I going to use my money to actually design my life? And it's that process that I help people with now.
The designing your life first. And I think we talked about this before everything, but it's tell me if I'm right or how you define it, but it's like first, most of the time people define and decide, hey, this is how I build my business and then design their life around it. But really it's designing your life first of what is going to be life-giving, your family, what priorities are, and build those values and things, pillars first before you build the business and then build your business around it. Right.
Yeah, totally. And number one is if we're going to be speaking about wealth, first we have to define what wealth actually is. So, when I host a retreat or do a live workshop, I ask people to define what wealth is. And usually the first hands mention something about money, but then we eventually get to a definition that sounds more like freedom. And so I define wealth as freedom in 4 areas: freedom of health, freedom of relationships, freedom of time, and freedom of mind. And we can achieve those in ascending order, right? So if we think about health, a quote that I love is that a healthy man wishes for many things, but a sick man only wishes for one, right? And so if we're not taking care of our body, it's really hard to go out and live that life that we want to live, because now we're limited by health issues. So health wealth is the first and foremost pillar of building true multidimensional wealth. And then next is relationships. So when I think about relational wealth, we've heard kind of the trite sayings like your network is your net worth, but it's true, right? Like you are the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. And so who am I letting into my sphere? Who am I taking influence from? Who am I spending my time with? And then, am I creating relationship capital where, like in the example I gave with my wife, like, these people are not just taking from me, but also giving. And there's an energetic balance where I'm not beholden to them. They're not beholden to me, but now 1 + 1 is greater than 2, right? We're additive forces in each other's lives. And then moving on to time wealth, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, right? The freedom to do what we want with whom we want, when we want. And I think that really is why most entrepreneurs set out to start a business, is they want freedom over their time. Like most of us are unemployable. We don't want a boss. We don't want to be on someone else's schedule. We don't want to be beholden to a paycheck, right? We want to create that freedom in our life. And yet so many of us lose sight of that along the way, right? Because business is hard. Like anybody that's telling you business is not hard is either trying to sell you something or they're lying, bottom line. Yeah. And if we're going to do this really hard thing, it better be worth it. Like we better make it count and go, okay, how do I actually create that freedom that I set out to create? And then finally, at the top of that pyramid is freedom of mind, right? Because all the money in the world doesn't matter if I'm staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., like worrying about where my next hit is coming from. So, cultivating those things and ultimately reaching the highest part of the hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization. How do I live in alignment with my purpose and my values? And that's the place that I'm really interested in helping people get to, is what is my purpose here? And then how do I design my life to serve that purpose?
I remember hearing this thing. I appreciate you talking about that full spectrum, because I think people don't process that as much. But I remember hearing this saying is that in the audience, this guy said, hey, how much money you want to make? And this young guy in the back said, I want to make $1 billion. And then he started chunking it down, right? Or why do you want $1 billion? Right? Well, I want to, have a jet, or I want to have, a nice car. Well, let's look at the leading lagging indicators and chunk it down of actually what those things cost and how much it could maintain it and all of those sort of things. Well, you really just need a few million. Like, have you found though, like in the US here, or even in, North America, even with Canada, has there been a certain threshold of wealth that has hit the stride of helping people get to a point where they're either making it on a monthly or a yearly or a net worth or an investment profile? What have you found to be kind of like a good mile marker that someone can hit to really know that they've arrived at a point of wealth?
Yeah, so you're touching on something that's really important, I think, and I think we need to start by defining paradigms. So there's kind of the Western paradigm of wealth, which is chasing money for money's sake and growth for growth's sake, right? Based on everything I just said, I found that was empty, right? Money for money's sake doesn't actually matter if you're not using it to cultivate real wealth. So then maybe there's a tendency after you kind of go down that road to swing the other way and lean into this kind of Eastern non-attachment style and like, hey, what if I get rid of all my possessions and live like a monk? But that idea is also incomplete, right? Because there are certain things like money does not buy happiness, but it sure as hell lays the path, right? Like there are a lot of things that money does buy. Like, again, getting back to freedom of health. Like if my kid gets sick and has to go in the hospital, like I don't have to worry about whether I can pay those bills. Like that gives me a massive amount of peace and freedom at night. So taking too extreme on either of one of those positions is kind of an incomplete worldview. And what we really want to build is an integrated worldview where we use money as a tool to scale our impact and to live into our values, but we're not chasing money for money's sake. And finding that middle ground, I think, is really important. So to answer your question, how much money is enough? I define that there's 3 levels of financial freedom. So the first level of financial freedom is 12 months of living expenses in a liquid, non-volatile asset that you can access in 24 hours. So that may be, a money market account, that may be something that's interest bearing, but you need to be able to access it and you need to be able to, create that peace of mind. So if you're a founder listening, or any high earner really, and you don't have 12 months of liquidity, do not pass go. Like that is the first thing you need to be building toward, because that's the foundation, the safety net that allows your mind to quit constantly worrying about where your next dollar is coming from. Next step is level 2 financial freedom, which is, I think, what most people look at as kind of retirement, right? We can use something like the 4% rule and go, okay, how much money do I need to live for 30 years if I retire at 65? And then the ultimate in freedom is level 3 financial freedom, which I call escape velocity. And escape velocity is where my assets generate enough income every single month to pay for my ideal life without ever drawing down on the principal. Essentially a perpetual money machine.
Yeah.
And back to what I should have been building versus what I did build, I was throwing out checks to all of these startups, but in reality, I could have been financially free at 36 years old if I had just stacked everything into a fixed income portfolio that paid for my living expenses. And that would have given me the freedom now to go start something where I can really make impact and I don't have to worry about making a paycheck. And so I think getting to that place frees up a lot of cognitive load and a lot of capacity and a lot of time in order to start designing your life around purpose and around meaning and around impact and around things that matter to you. So what that looks like, escape velocity, I use the rule of 33, which is a little bit more conservative than others out there, but essentially 33 times your annual spending is enough money to spend at that level for the rest of your life. So if you spend $20K a month, that looks like $5 to $7 million. If you spend $50K a month, it's $15 to $20 million, right? Which first of all, it is still a lot of money, but I thought I needed $100 million to be happy, right? That's significantly less to reach escape velocity and then start scaling impact.
That's really interesting. Is it typically an index fund, or how do you end up safeguarding that?
Yeah. So, again, rather than scaling for more, I actually want to engineer out risk, right? Because once I start to creep up on these levels of financial freedom, more money doesn't actually improve my quality of life, but losing money does. So I want to put these in as least risky assets as I possibly can. So for me, the ideal way to structure my escape velocity is in a fixed income portfolio. So like treasuries, municipal bonds, things that have very, very low chance of losing the principal. Because every time you earn a dollar, right, you've traded your life force for that dollar. And every time you lose that dollar, you push your finish line out further, and you've essentially traded that life force for nothing. So, one of the rules that I learned from some of the wealthiest family offices in America is never lose money. And people think that say like it takes money to make money. Like if you don't bet it, you can't make it. But the reality is, if you've earned that dollar, you want to put it in assets where it's never going to be going away, right? And so you're pulling your timeline forward by protecting your assets.
And is that in a taxable way? Like I've seen people do, like, the 529 for their kids, or building some, equity hold that has it where they're building, or different LLCs for different properties, or you're using, HSA accounts for the, like, do you go through that route of like hedging for all the tax stuff that people need to think through as well?
Yeah. So when we think about reaching escape velocity, right? If I say, okay, my goal is to reach escape velocity as quickly as I possibly can, there's three ways to pull that timeline forward. Number one, and by far the easiest, is to make more.
Yeah.
Right. So how do I scale my revenue and my profit as fast as I possibly can? The second way is to spend less, right? Like I just said, hey, 50K, you need $20 million. 20K, you only need $7 million. So if I can reduce my spending, I pull that timeline forward as well. We can also bucket it into essential and non-essential spending, right? Like essential spending is my mortgage, my groceries, kind of, the basic parts of life. And then non-essential spending is luxury travel, exotic cars, things like that. Like we can build our safety bucket first around essential spending and then kind of move into non-essential, where it's now kind of playing with the house money essentially. And the last way is saving on taxes. And this is actually the least efficient way to move your timeline forward, because every time, let's say you spend an hour working on a tax strategy, you're only saving between 30 and 40 cents on the dollar if you're in the highest income bracket, right? Versus spending that same time growing your business, you're keeping 70 cents of that dollar. So, again, it all exists on a spectrum. There are some low-hanging fruit things you can do, like a 529, like an HSA, like a 401k, and those aren't bad, but most people way overspend time and energy trying to save on taxes when they'd be better off just trying to grow their business. So my recommendation for people is, put some of those low-hanging fruit, kind of apply the 80-20 rule, put some of those low-hanging fruit things in place, but don't overthink saving on taxes, because if you're paying taxes, you're making money.
I can see that. How do you get a wife on board with this? I think there's so many times there's the parallels of like people are obsessed with growth, right? But then their spouse isn't. Like, and so I think there's, and you've had this account where you've had different marriages. And so there's different thoughts behind money itself, and then the growth and destination you're looking for. Sometimes it diverges in where you're growing beyond them, or you're trying to look at how you can work with your wife for those goals. How do you go about defining that dream with the spouse?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's something that I work on a lot with members of my community and in my program. Is how do we get on the same page with our partners when it comes to finances? And it's back to what I said earlier: is let's forget about money for a second. Let's define what it is we actually value. Is it being home every night at 6:00 to have dinner with my kids? Okay, cool. Now we can start to work backwards. So there's a saying I love, which is show me your bank account and show me your calendar, and I'll show you what you actually value. What I want to do is I want to turn that on its head, right? I want to define what it is I value and now align my bank account and my calendar to serving those values. So what I would say to people who want to get on the same page with their partner when it comes to money and spending, which, by the way, kids and money are the number one and number two things that couples fight about, right? Yep. So let's get on the same page from a first principles perspective. Let's talk about what is the life that we want to create here together. What is it that we value? And by the way, we may value different things. That's okay. But let's figure out how we can include and utilize both of our values in creating this shared vision. Right. And so if you can start to create that shared vision for what life is, now you can back into decisions like spending. Going, hey, we're working to build escape velocity here. Right now, we're on track to do that in 10 years. But if you're buying a new Louis Vuitton bag every month, that's pushing our escape velocity timeline out. So I'm always trying to get people to shift from thinking in terms of money to think in terms of time. And I've created a financial freedom tool called the one-page wealth snapshot. I'll make sure you get the link to include in the show notes, but it's essentially a financial freedom calculator that will start helping you shift from thinking in terms of dollars to thinking in terms of time. And now you can kind of make these decisions and go, hey, if we move from spending 20K a month to 15K a month, we actually pull our timeline forward by 2 years. That helps couples then start to get on the same page, right? Because now we're talking in terms of values instead of terms of dollars.
why is it that our education system doesn't hit on these things? Because I mean, it's very challenging for some people to say, "Hey, I want to build wealth, but I have no idea what that looks like," right? Or what does that mean? Or where's that number? Where's it? And I definitely think it's the leverage of time that wealthy people is something on your deathbed. It's like I can always make more money, but I don't have enough time, right? Or the health thing that we're talking about. So I think, time is the absolute goal for everybody, which is you can't have a job and do that. You have to build wealth by building a business, for one. But talk about that a little bit of like,
yeah, you hit on it exactly, right? Is that if you want to create multidimensional wealth, you need some sort of leverage, right? Because if you're stuck trading time for money, then you're stuck on the traditional path, which is put off your life, work your ass off, wait till you're 65, and then hopefully you have enough money to do the things that you put off, and you get to actually enjoy life. Pause there. I've got an internet connection issue. Okay, looks like we're back. So, people are taught by the school system. And when you ask why doesn't the school system train us on this, it's because, well, what is the basis? What are the first principles of our school system? It was designed in the early part of last century to create good factory workers. Like that's the reality. Like through the Industrial Revolution, they use things like school bells to train future factory workers. So the product that is output by our school system is that of 100 years ago, and it's designed to create workers to feed the machine. So our school system is not designed to teach people to create wealth, because that's actually not the point. So if we're going to drop out of that paradigm and try to create wealth for ourselves, you're exactly right. We need some sort of leverage. And entrepreneurship is one of the greatest paths to that leverage, but it's not the only way, right? So there are a lot of people out there with high-paying jobs that build a real estate portfolio as a side hustle, for example. Sure. So like there are multiple ways to create wealth, but you have to have leverage in some sort of way. And for most of us, it's building a business that allows us to decouple our time from money. Like, how do I build a machine that keeps generating money without me inputting more time? And one of the exercises I love to do with people is I tell them, hey, imagine you have your best year ever next year. How much money would you like to make? And they write that down. I said, okay, now I want you to triple it. And then ultimately I'll have them 10x that number and go, okay, how are you going to get to that number? And here's what they realize. Like at first they're like, okay, well, I need to spend more time on this. I need to spend more time on this. And then at some point you go, oh, wait a minute. My limit, like I can't possibly get to 10x where I am right now by spending more time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of why I hate this idea of like work hard and you'll be successful. Right? I think that's the greatest lie ever told, because there are 7 billion people on this planet that are engaged in backbreaking labor every day that are not successful by our societal standards. Right? So there must be something other than hard work. And that's where leverage comes in. How do I build something that works without me inputting more time? And that's what most of us are actually doing when we think about building and scaling a business.
Yeah. Mike, I could ask you so many different questions because this is so good. And when you finish your book, we'll have you back on. And I think we want to be able to hit on these for sure. But how can people connect with you further, get that resource you were talking about? How can people connect with you further?
Yeah, so connect with me on Instagram at mbrown.co. I'd love to connect there. I like to talk to people that follow me, so we'll have a conversation. And then sign up for my newsletter. I spend a lot of time every week. I write a long form newsletter, outlining some of these concepts, and it's stories from the trenches. It's real life experience, and that's my favorite thing I do. And you'll sign up for my newsletter when you go get that Wealth Snapshot. So I'll include a link to the Wealth Snapshot for the show notes, and you can go sign up for the newsletter there. And then I've got a book coming out in the fall, so sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get updates as that solidifies.
Awesome. Well, guys, go check out Mike. Appreciate you being on the show. I'm glad you were able to share some knowledge with us about how to build wealth. And then as you're trying to grow your business, if you need to build an online influence and trying to look at how to run ads, build sales teams, using and leveraging AI, there's that full training down below for you to check out as well. We thank you for listening to the podcast, and we will see you on the next show.